Hey, this is Arya, and today we're making a sci-fi particle creature. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy my work, and as always, if you're able to support me even further, hop over to my Patreon page where you can sign up to become a member, where you'll get access to the exact file that I use for my animation, as well as the other files you see on my channel. Alright, here we go. The first thing we'll do is hit A to select everything, then hit delete to clear the scene. Next, hold Shift and hit A, go to Mesh and select UV Sphere. Now we want to scale this up, so hit S to scale and type in 2. Then we can just bring this up by hitting G, Z, and typing in 3. Then let's just head over here to the right to the Modifiers tab, click here, and let's add a subdivision surface of 1. Then just to smooth this out, we can right click and shade smooth. Awesome, so we're going to use this as our emitter, so let's just head over to the particle properties here on the right. Next, we can click this plus symbol to add a new particle system. Then we're just going to go through and start making some changes. So for mine, I set this to 10,000, which should be okay for most computers, but since we are going to duplicate this later, feel free to set this to like 7,500. Okay, so we don't want this to start from 0, so what we're going to do is set our frame start to something like -20. And you'll see that something is already happening here, and the reason why is because we're on frame 44. So just click here and let's head back to frame 1. Next, we're going to set our end frame to 400. You'll notice that this is set to something higher, and the reason I'm setting it to that is because my animation was 500 frames, and with particles depending on your start and end frame and your amount, Blender will calculate how many particles to output per frame. So basically it's going to take 10,000 particles and output it over 420 frames. And if I were to set this to 250 to match our animation length, you'd get a lot more particles coming out at once. So the nice thing about this setup is, if you want to do a longer animation, you can just set this to 500 and double the length of your animation. Okay, so let's set the lifetime to something like 600. This doesn't really matter, just make sure that it's longer than the length of your animation. Then we can set the randomness to 0.15. We may not notice this effect, but just to give it a little bit of variance. Then we can scroll all the way past velocity setting to the physics. Then we're going to change this from Newtonian to Boyd's. You'll see now that we've gotten rid of our velocity settings that used to sit in between the cache and the physics, because our Boyd system will be calculating all of the physics other than any forces that we add. And let's just open battle and we can change the aggression to 5. Then just scroll down a little further, open up the Boyd brain. Then we just want to make sure that we've got our first rule selected and then hit minus. Now we're left with just one rule, which is flock. And that's it. So let's just scroll down a little bit further. Instead of having halos as our particle, we're going to create an object. So click object, set the scale to 0.04 and the scale random to 0.5. Then we need to select our object. So let's create one back in the 3D viewport by hitting Shift A, mesh, and we can click icosphere. Then let's just bring this out of the way by hitting GZ and we can just drag this down. Hit the decimal key on your numpad just to orbit in around our particle. Feel free to leave the particle as is, but if you do want to add some variance like I did, just hit tab to go into edit mode, or you can click up here and click edit mode. Then we're just going to deselect everything. Click on the proportional editing. Then you just want to randomly grab vertices, hit G, and you can just bring some of these out. And some of these in as well, just to give a more random look to your particle. Great, so that should work just fine. It just captures the light a little bit better just because there's more angles and stuff for the light to bounce off of. Now you can hit tab to go back into object mode or click here. Then we can just zoom back out and click on our sphere, which by the way is our emitter, so let's just rename this to emitter. And we can click our icosphere and rename this to particle 1. So click back on the emitter, make sure you're in the particle settings, then we'll just scroll all the way back down to the object, click here and choose particle 1. Then the last thing we need to do is just make sure that we grab our gravity and set it to 0. Cool, so when you hit play you should have something that looks like this where you just have particles traveling around. So if you have that, then just make sure again to head back to frame 1. And now we can start to add our forces. So hold Shift A and let's go all the way down to force field, and the first force field that we're going to add is force, so click that. We want to make sure that this is center with our particle system, so let's hit G, Z, and 3. Now we can head over to the physics properties. Let's change the strength to 3 and the flow to 2. Next we're going to add a turbulence, so Shift A again, force field, and then click turbulence. Let's bring this up again, so G, Z, and 3. Back over to the physics settings, we'll change the strength to 5.1 and the flow to 1. Awesome, and then we're just going to add one more force, so Shift A again, force field, and let's select the vortex. G, Z, and 3 again to bring this up, then we're going to hit G, Y, and we're just going to bring this over here, just till it's outside of our simulation. Then the very final thing we want to do is rotate this, so we're going to hit R, X, and type in 90. One more time, back over to the physics properties, change the strength to 2, and the inflow to 0.1. Great, so everything should be all set. Make sure that you're on frame 1 and then hit play. So hopefully you have something that is looking like this. If not, just make sure that you've got all your correct values for each of your forces. Keep in mind that there is an empty value in the turbulence here, so you want to leave that to 0 and make sure the flow is set to 1. Also, sometimes if you make some changes, Blender doesn't reset, so what you can do is if you're having an issue, just pick one of your forces, click on one of your values, and just retype in the value. Then when you go back to frame 1, you should have no issues. Great, so we've got our particle system finished. So the last thing we want to do is just click on our system, head over to the particles, and make sure that we uncheck show emitter for the render and for the viewport as well. So we've got our particle system, so let's head back to frame 1. I found the best way to do this was just to duplicate this particle system and set of forces and put them each into their own collections. So I'm going to show you how I did that. Let's just head up to our scene collection here. Make sure you select where it says scene collection. Then we're going to click this here until we've got 7 new collections. Then we just want to rename these all just so that we can keep track. So again, name these whatever you want. I just named them T for tentacle, but you can do whatever you feel like. Just make sure that it is consistent because later on we will be selecting them through this list here. Okay, so we'll leave our main collection here just for our scene objects such as our particle, but we're going to take everything else, so click the emitter, shift, and then click the field to grab everything. Then we'll just click and drag and drop this into T1 collection. Okay, so make sure that you've got all 4 of these selected, then we'll go into the 3D viewport, hold shift, hit D, then hit escape just to drop it in place. Then you'll see that we've got a copy of each of these and they're selected, so we're just going to grab, drag, and drop those into T2. Great, so now if we were to hit play, you'll see that we basically just have 2 particle systems doing the exact same thing, which of course is not what we want. We want to make sure that this is rotated, so head back to frame 1. Then the way I like to rotate things is to use an empty, so Shift A, empty, and plane axis. Since we want to rotate from the center, we're going to move this to the center, so G, Z, and 3. Now if we just go up here, you'll see that I accidentally was selected on T1, so it placed it in there. So let's just grab this and drop it into T2. So now we want to parent our new system to this empty, so we're going to click the emitter, then hold Control, then we're going to click all 3 of our forces. Then still holding Control, we're going to click our empty last. Then in the viewport, we can hold Control and hit P, and select our middle option, Keep Transform. Now if we open up our empty, you'll see that everything is inside of it. Now we just want to hit N on our keyboard to open up our transform settings. And honestly, this was the hardest part for me, was just figuring out which angle each of these should be on. So I'm just going to give you the values for all of these as we go through, just so that you're not wasting time trying to figure out which angle it should be on. If we click the first emitter here, you'll see everything is set to 0, so we're just going to leave that as our base rotation. So the next thing we want to do is have one going up and down. So inside of T2, let's click our empty. Then we can just click our X value and type in 90. Now you can see that our particle system is facing this way. Then if we hit play, you'll see that we've now introduced a new issue. So what's happening here is Both of our particle emitters are using all of these forces into one, which is not what we want. So what we need to do is separate our forces, which is where our collections come in. So if we head up to T1 and click the emitter, scroll all the way down to the bottom to our fieldways, you'll see that we have effector collection, which just basically means that it will only use the effectors from the collection that you select. So click here and we'll select T1. Then of course we want to do that to our second particle system, so we'll just click the emitter here under T2. Head down and you'll see that it's already set as T1. So if we were to click this and to set it to T2, the problem is if we were to go to our first emitter, you'll see that it's also set to T2. So what we need to do is duplicate our particle system. So let's just click here and set this back to T1 for our first emitter. Then click on this emitter inside of T2, scroll all the way up to the top of the particle system. Then all you need to do is just click this copy button and you'll get a new particle system. Now you'll see if we click on our other emitter, we have this particle settings and particle settings 001. So now if we scroll all the way back down to the effector collection, click here, we can select T2 and you'll see that they are now separate collections. So back to frame 1 and hit play and you'll see that we've got it working properly now. So now we just need to do that a few more times. So let's select the empty inside of T2. Then you want to shift select so that we've got everything inside of our collection selected. Hold shift D and hit escape to leave it in place. Then back up to the right here and we'll just open our new empty. Click on it and then we'll shift select everything for our new system. Click and we'll drag this into T3. Then we're going to have our particle system facing along this axis here, so we just need to rotate this up on the Y by 90 degrees. So let's click the Y and type in 90. Then again, we'll click on our emitter, head up to the top so we can just make a copy. So click here, all the way back down, and select T3. Hit play, and you can see now that we've got everything working in 6 directions. So of course you could just leave it at this if you wanted, but if you want to get all the tentacles that I had, you just need to do this a few more times. So I'm just going to go through this a little bit quicker this time, but I'm going to stop each time and make sure I give you the rotation settings because again, this was the most confusing part. Awesome, so as always back to frame 1 just so that we're not getting weird results in our viewport. Click the new empty, shift click, so we have all of our stuff, shift D and escape. Open this up and make sure to click and then shift click everything, then drag and drop these into our new system. Click on the empty, then we're going to change both our X and our Y to 45. Click the emitter, head up to the top, make a copy, head down and make sure to select T4. Click, shift D, escape, open this up, select everything, drag and drop, click the empty, then the rotation settings for these are going to be minus 45 and leave the set at 0. Click the emitter back up to the top, make a copy, then set the effector collection to T5. Select them all, duplicate, select them all again, drag and drop, click the empty, then we'll set both our X and Y to 45 and the Z to 90. Click the emitter, make a copy, then change this to T6. Now the very last time, we're just going to select everything here, duplicate and leave it in place. Open this up, select everything, and we'll just drop this into T7. Select empty, and for our final rotation, we're going to set our X to minus 45, our Y to 45, and our Z to 0. Click on this emitter, make a copy, and set this to 7. So you see that if we hit play, things are just sort of going straight out, whereas in my animation, these were spinning around a little bit more. So the way I did that was, we'll just go back to frame 1, add a new empty by hitting Shift A and selecting plane axis, G, Z, and 3 to center it. Then let's just scale this up just so we can see it. So S and type in 10. Then if we just come over to the right here, you'll see that I wasn't really paying attention, so it probably dropped it into the collection that I was selected on. So I'm just going to click and drag this up to our main collection. Then double click and rename this Control All. Then make sure you've got it selected, and when you're in the 3D viewport, you can hit A, which will select everything in our scene for us, and then hold Control, hit B. Then again, you want to select the middle option, which is Object, Keep Transform. So if we just go over to our collections here and open this up, you'll see that everything is parented. And just keep in mind that these are just sort of little containers because we still have them all in each of our collections. Now you can just click away, and we're just going to click on our new control and set a keyframe on the rotation. Then if we just head all the way to the final frame, don't worry about these particles. We want to set all of our rotation values to something like 50. Right click and insert a new keyframe. Now if you hit play, you'll see that we've got a little bit more movement with our particles here. We are now past the hardest part, so you could bake your particles at this point, but for my animation, I also added a ground object and made sure that was a collision, just because some of these particles go a little bit low, so if you don't care, you can bake them now, but if not, just hang on for one more step. So instead of creating my own ground plane, I actually used the landscape builder, so if you do want to use this and don't have this installed, it's super easy. Just go up to edit, preferences, and make sure to select add-ons, all, then just type in landscape and make sure that this is checked on. Then you can hit Shift A, mesh, and landscape. Make sure not to click away. Head down to the left here to open our settings. Then we're just going to make this a lot larger, so let's set this to 50. Change our noise size to something like 3, and we can also change our height. Make sure that if you don't want your tops to be flattened there, just change the maximum to something larger than the height. If you don't like the way this is looking, feel free to just go through the seed options here just to find something that is a little bit more to your liking. Then once you're happy with everything, you can just click away. Now if you click on the ground plane again, you can head over to the physics properties and add a collision. I also made sure to subdivide mine, but you want to make sure that that goes after the collision just so that it's not as heavy for the system. So add the collision first, then in the modifiers tabs we can click here and add a subdivision surface of 1 or 2. Now we can just bring this down by hitting G, Z, and we can just bring this down by about 3 or so. Then click. Alright, so we're finally ready to bake our particles, so you can just pick any one of our emitters here. Head over to the particle settings, then we're just going to open up the cache, and instead of baking for each particle system, we'll just go here to bake all dynamics. So hit bake, and this should take less than a minute. Now before we play our simulation, I always like to remove collision physics just to speed up the viewport. So select the ground, head over to the physics, and remove the collision. Now if we hit play, you can see that we've got our full simulation. Select this filter toggle and we're going to add our simulation and render toggles. Then we just need to open up our control and select our particle. Then we can turn the viewport and the render off. Then close this down. And if you notice, you can see that again I was selecting the wrong collection, so our landscape dropped into here. So we can just click and drag this to our main collection. Also for the particle, if you want, you can just turn it back on, select it, and then if you head back to frame 1, you can hold Alt, hit P, and you can clear the parent. That way you'll see now that it's not being controlled by our control, it just sits underneath our landscape. So again, make sure that you're saving and hit play, and you should have your entire system going. And hopefully things are looking awesome for you. Now all we need to do is add some lighting and texture, so just pick a frame that looks nice to you and we can work from there. Since we're done using all of our collections for now, you can just click the arrow on all of these. By the way, if you've got a really slow computer, you can definitely turn some of these off for now, which will help speed up your viewport, but I'm just going to leave mine on just so that we get the full effect. So we're going to start by adding our camera, so this time just make sure that you selected the collection here, just so that it doesn't end up inside one of our other collections. Then you can hit Shift A and click camera. Then just set up your viewport in front of your creature, hold Control Alt and hit 0. Then you can just use the transform settings on the right here under item to set your view. Also, if you hit F3 and type in walk, you can use your mouse as well as your arrow keys to move in and out and orbit. You can also use the Q and E to go up and down as well. So let's just set this to something basic for now and click. Then we can start adding the rest of our scene. So Shift A, let's go to mesh and click cylinder. Then we're just going to scale this up so that we've got a large background. Then just make sure that this is large enough so that you're not going in and out of it. Right click and shade smooth. So let's head over to our shading tab, and again we can just turn on our render preview again. Head up to our collections and we can just click on our particle. Then we want to hit new. Click here to change the base color to something gray. Then we just want to bring our transmission up to something like 0.8. Next hit Shift A and we're going to search for bump. Click and then we'll hook the normal to the normal. Shift A again, search for noise. Then we can hook the factor up to the height, as well as our roughness. Then we'll set our scale to 15, detail to 25, and our distortion to 0.2, which will just give us a little bit of texture. Then the final thing we need to do is Shift A and search for color ramp. Then we're just going to bring our dark and light values into the center. Before we move on, let's just add some lights. So Shift A, then we'll come all the way down to light and click point. We want to bring this up, so G, Z, and 3. Then we'll just come over to the right and click on this little light bulb icon. Select the color and set this to something red. Then we can set the power to 2500. And now you'll see that we're starting to get somewhere. So next we want to click on our landscape. Click new. Then we just want to bring our base value down. And at this point you can honestly add whatever kind of texture you want. The truth is it doesn't show up that much in the render anyways, but if you want you can head to textures.com. You will have to sign up for a free account, and I'll leave the link in the description as well. Then the only two things that you need is the normal map and the roughness. Once you've got your textures, you can drag and drop the normal and the roughness. Plug the roughness into the roughness. Shift A to search for normal. Then color into color, and normal into normal. And just see right away that things are looking a little bit weird. So since this is not made from just a normal plane, it actually doesn't have a UV. So we can make sure we add that, which is super easy. Just head over to the UV editing. Then we just want to turn off our cylinder here just so it doesn't get in our way. Hit 7 on your numpad just to go into top orthographic. Make sure that everything is selected and you can hit U and project from view. Then we just want to scale this up a little bit, so we're going to hit S and we'll just drag this out until it's a little bit larger. Now if we head back to our shading tab, you can see that it's looking a little better now. I'm not really liking the amount of roughness, so what we can do is Shift A and let's search for a color ramp. Then if we just add this in between, we can just bring our values a little bit closer here just to get a bit more roughness. So let's just bring this down to something like that. You can also turn off your overlays if you just need to see a little bit better. Things are looking pretty good. We're actually almost done. Let's turn our cylinder back on. Then we just want to add a quick material to this, so just make sure that you have it selected. Click new. Then we can just bring the specular all the way down and the roughness all the way up. Click the base color and bring the value all the way to 0. Okay, so things are starting to look really good. Let's add another light. You'll see that we can't really see anything, and that's because our overlays are off. So we'll just click here to turn our overlays back on. Shift A, light, and we'll click area. Then G, Z, and we'll just drag this up till it's above our particles. If you just come over to the right here, click on the light properties. Let's change the shape to ellipse. So now we can just zoom in a little bit just so we can see, and we want to scale this up, so just hit S. We can just drag this till it's about the size of our particle system. Then click, head over to the power, and we're going to set this to 2000. Click here, then we're going to make this slightly blue. Great, so let's just head back to the layout tab, and we're getting really close, so let's hit 0 just to go into our camera. Click on your landscape, and it's looking a little bit small, so let's just hit G and X just to move this back a little bit. Then we want to scale this, so you can just hit S, Shift Z, and type in 1.5, and then again GX just to bring this a little bit further back. I didn't do this in Eevee, so at this point I'm going to switch over to cycles by going into the render engine and selecting cycles. The ground is a little bit lighter than in my simulation, so you can just go to shading again. Click on the landscape, then you can just click on the base color and set this to something a little darker like that. As well, if you want your textures to be a little bit smaller, you can either go back into the UV and scale it, or you can just click on one of these. Then if you've got the Node Wrangler add-on enabled by going to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and typing in Node, make sure this is turned on. Then select one of these, hit Ctrl T, and hook the vector to both of the vectors. Then you can select all of the scale values and set this to something like 5. Again, this is just a base. You can go through and tweak this any way you like. Head back to the layout. Now there's only a couple more things I did, so if you want to add some atmospheric particles, it's super easy. Just make sure to turn back your overlays on and let's go to flat shading. Then if you just zoom out a bit, we can just turn off our cylinder at the moment just so we can see. Shift A, mesh, and cube. Then just scale this up till it's covering as much scene as you want. Head over to the particle system. Click here to add a new particle system. Then I think I did something like 25,000. You want to set these all to frame 1 and set the lifetime to something like 500. Then open up the source, and instead of faces we want to do volume. Head back to frame 1 just to reload our system. Then we'll just head down to velocity, set this to 0. Give our system some Brownian motion just to give it some shaky particles. Click here to add a new particle object. Then we'll hit Shift A, mesh, and select UV sphere. You'll see that if I put on X-ray, it's kind of in the way, so again, just hit GZ just to bring this down and out of the way. Then we'll just add a quick material, so click here, click New, and instead of having our principled shader, we're going to add an emission shader. Set the color to something a little bit red, and we'll set the value way down to 0.025. Click back on the emitter, turn off our X-ray, then we'll go back to the particle settings. Scroll all the way down, click here, then in this case we're going to select our sphere, which is our new particle, so you can also name this particle 2. Back into the emitter settings, we're going to make sure that we turn off show emitter for both the viewport and the render. Then you'll see that this is going to be affected by all of our forces, which is not what we want. So we're going to make a new collection by clicking here, click New. Then we can just name this World Particles. Grab our cube, Control click on our particle, then we can just drag and drop these into our new collection. Now if we click back on the cube, we can go down and do just what we did before and select the effector collection to be the world particles, which is nothing. While we're here, let's just turn our gravity all the way to 0 as well. Now if we hit play, you'll see that we've just got these particles sort of just floating around in the air. And if this is too heavy for your system, you can definitely lower the amount by quite a bit. You can go all the way down to like 10,000 and it should be fine. I just wanted to have a lot of particles in mine. Then once you're happy with that, make sure again to select the cube and hit bake. Make sure to save, and now if we hit 0 to go back into our view and turn on our render preview, you can see that we've got a bunch of particles. So let's just turn our cylinder back on, our overlays off. Then we can just pick a frame, click our camera, and we're just going to add some depth of field. So click here to add depth of field, and we're going to set the f-stop to 0.2. Everything has gone blurry, so what we need to do is just select a focus object, overlays back on, and flat shading, then Shift A, empty, plane axis, and we can call this focus. You can click and drag this up, then just drop it into our main collection as well, GZ3. Now back into the camera settings, click here, then we'll go all the way down and select our focus object. Back into the camera, and let's turn on render preview. I'm just going to quickly go back to the particle settings and delete my bake. Set this to 10,000, then quickly rebake. And if they're still a bit too intrusive, you can just change the scale a little bit. And we can change our scale random to 0.8. Now you'll see that it looks a lot more sparse and natural. So the final thing I wanted to show you is just how I got my camera to circle around. So one more time, we're just going to go back into flat shading, turn our overlays back on. Then we're going to click on our camera, head over to the constraints. Then if we click here, you can see that there's an option that says track 2. So we want to click that. Then we can select our new empty, which was focus. Then you'll see if we hit 0 to go back into our camera view here, any way that we move our camera, it will stay focused on our objects. So this is really cool. I'm just going to do a super quick example for you. So back to frame 1, Keep in mind that once you've got a constraint activated, you can't use your walk navigation anymore, so you could just X this out and use that to animate, or you can simply just use the location controls up here. And I found just using the location controls is enough since our rotation is taken care of by the focus object. So find a good starting frame, then right click and add a key. Then if we were just to go to frame 60, we could just come to the side like this, and you can see as we move these, our rotation isn't changing, but it is staying focused on our object here. Then right click and insert a keyframe. Now if we hit play, you can see that we've got this kind of thing happening here. That's a little quick, so we'll just bring this back. Just keep in mind that I did a 500 frame animation, so this will need to be a little bit quicker. But you can do something like that. Then if you go to something like frame 180, you could spin all the way around here to the back, then insert a keyframe. Finally head to the final keyframe and we can just bring this all the way back around here to something like that. And add a keyframe. Now if we were to hit play, you can see that we've got our camera which is staying focused on our simulation. Great, so that's everything. I'm just gonna pick a frame here, turn back on our render preview, head over to the rendering tab, save one more time, then render, and there it is, our final image. So I hope you all enjoyed this and this gave you a good start. I'd love to see what you come up with or what you utilize this in making. So again, always make sure to tag me, like and subscribe, and as well if you can support me through Patreon, that would be amazing. And you'll be able to get the exact file that I used for my animation along with a bunch of others. Okay, hope to see you soon. Bye!